How can you go from owning a multifamily property with an FHA loan to owning it as an investment property?
It's a great question, and there are many ways. First and foremost, you can have an FHA property be an investment property after you have completed the seasoning period. Generally, it's 1 year, right? Sometimes it's 6 months. My personal lender did 6 months for me with the FHA process, but um, you can, after the 1 year or whatever your lender requires you to live in that property, you can move out, and that can remain an investment property, right? And then you just go get a conventional or whatever type of mortgage you want on the second property, right? So there's situation number one. Situation number two is you refinance from an FHA to a conventional, which would now be an investment property conventional loan. Okay. And something to consider is that if you try to do that, is that you need now 20% or more equity in the property, generally, right? Sometimes lenders can work with you, but if you're trying to refinance into an investment property so that, you can now take that FHA and go get another owner occupied, because again, if you refinance to a conventional owner occupied, you can no longer go get an FHA because you already have an owner occupied. You got to now wait out the seasoning period for your conventional mortgage, right? So that's another thing to consider. You can refinance into a different mortgage to then go use an FHA again, right? But it has to be investment property. The third way is that you can have multiple FHA loans at one time, and not a whole lot of people understand this. So there are really four ways. There are actually four ways the FHA allows to get a second FHA property. The first one is that you move over 100 miles away, and generally that means job relocation, right? We had Joe Williams on episode 6 or 7, I believe, and he moved from Minneapolis to Richmond, Virginia, right? And he got his second FHA property, right? So obviously that's way more than 100 miles. So there's option number one, but it doesn't always have to be job relocation. They're very vague on that, right? So you potentially could move 100 miles, more than 100 miles away, and get a second mortgage. Now you're driving a long distance to work or whatever, but that is an option. All right. The second one the FHA allows is that your family grows in size. Again, very vague, right? So you have to talk to lenders, and it's very, it's up to their interpretation. It's up to a lender's interpretation of that, to how you can do it. So you might have to talk to many. But if you get married, if you have a kid, if your spouse, if you have stepkids, right, from a spouse, if your family grows in size in some capacity, right, and it's up to the lender's interpretation. Now you can get a second one. The other two are if you have a jointly owned property, right? If you have a jointly owned FHA and you leave, or if you lived in an FHA property and you move from it, right? Those two situations, now you can get an additional FHA property if it's jointly owned. So now someone else is assuming the other one. Now you get to take another FHA property, right? Again, up to a lender's interpretation. Talk to your lender. But those three ways are the main ways to go from an FHA loan to owning, to having an investment property and then going to reuse that FHA.